My name is Jocelyn Ramirez. I'm the chef and founder of plant-based food business here in Los Angeles called Todo Verde. And I'm so honored to have you all here to work on this Enmoladas recipe. And we made mole in the past before in a couple different varieties, mole verde, mole colorado. There's many different varieties of mole. And one thing that is for sure is that most of those varieties of mole typically take a little bit of time to get done, right? In order to develop all those flavors, it's a lot of layering of, toasting each individual ingredient, maybe dry roasting or even pan frying. And for that reason, most people don't typically make mole from scratch at home. But from time to time, I will admit that even myself I do try to find little shortcuts here and there to just try to make the mole experience a little bit more fast. And it shouldn't take too long. I know that sometimes people say, oh, mole is something that takes, a whole day or 2 days. And that is true if you're cooking it from scratch, completely from scratch for a lot of people, like in Oaxaca, where a lot of people do make and consume mole. They're making it for hundreds of people, for the whole vecindad, right? The whole neighborhood. And so that definitely is a task that will take a lot of time. But if you're just making it for your family at home, if it's a family of 4 or even, a couple of people, it shouldn't take as long. But here again, we'll be sharing a couple different little shortcuts. So I'm going to be going back and forth a little bit between pan frying a couple of ingredients for our mole. Then I'll jump into talking a little bit about jackfruit, and we'll come back to the mole. So we'll do a little bit of back and forth until our recipe is complete. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prep some of the ingredients for my mole, and I'm going to bring over a couple of ingredients just here to my screen so you can see. I have 5 guajillo chiles. These are dried chiles. Guajillo chiles are long and narrow, and they're typically pretty mild and spiced. They're not overly spicy, and they give the mole and any salsa that you use them in a pretty nice body. So these are really versatile chiles. And again, they don't provide like a super spicy punch. Sometimes when they're a little bit smaller, they tend to be a little bit spicier. But these are a little bit on the larger side, so I don't anticipate that they'd be all too spicy. What I did is I took off the stem, I removed as many seeds as I could, and I gave them a good rinse. One rule of thumb for chiles is that you want to try to get something that is slightly pliable, meaning like it's a dried chile, but it's not crispy and overly dried. That means that it's probably been dried for a really long time. And so these are dry, but they have a little give to them. They don't immediately break. And so that means that the chiles are a little bit more fresh. And so I'm going to be pan frying these chiles along with some onions and garlic. I have 1 yellow onion. I had 3 little ones. So I'm going to use 3 little ones in place of like 1 sort of medium yellow onion. And then I also have 4 cloves of garlic. So 3 to 4 cloves of garlic. Whatever works best for you. We're going to pan fry these in a little bit of oil, and I'm later going to add that with some, if you had a tomato a fresh globe tomato that you chop up, then you can add that. Once you start to see some color coming onto your onions and garlic, you can add your chopped tomato to that and kind of saute it together to add some color to the tomato. The chiles, I will say, are going to cook slightly faster than the onion and garlic. So I'll probably pull these out of the pan. Not probably, I will pull these out of the pan a little bit before these onion and garlic are done. But my little shortcut is I'm going to be using an 8-ounce can of tomato sauce versus the raw tomato. So this is already going to provide a little bit more depth of flavor than the 1 chopped tomato. Because it's already developed more of the flavors, and this tomato that was used here is obviously extremely ripe. So let's go ahead and get started, and then I'll come back to the jackfruit. So all I'm going to do is, if you come to the shot on my stove, I'm just going to add, I have a skillet here, a cast iron skillet that's been preheating. Let me slightly turn the screen here or bring it over. Let me move this. Here we go. All right. So a couple things that I prepped ahead of time. I do have a pot here, a small pot, and my 2 to 3 cups of vegetable broth. I just have it on super low heat here. I just wanted to bring it up to a warm temperature so that when I drop my chiles and everything in there, it's going to help to soften them even faster. So again, this is like the quick molito version. I know for the other times we've done mole, we use room temp stuff, but the hot temperature will help everything move a little bit faster. So that's just super low vegetable broth, 2 to 3 cups. Here I have 3 cups, and then I can tantear to see, okay, I need a little bit more or less. I might even need more than these 3 cups. It really depends on like how large your onion is, how large your chiles are. If your temperature, if you keep it cooking for a while and it starts to reduce down too much, you might need a little bit more broth, right? So that's the thing about mole. You try to get as accurate as you can, but it's also a little bit of a of guesstimating, of really using your senses and looking to see how your sauce is doing and see what else it needs. So all I did here is I added a couple tablespoons of oil. I'm using grapeseed oil, which is my personal preference for cooking here at home. And I'm just coating the bottom of my pan. I had this preheating on super low heat prior to class. I'm turning it up slightly to a medium heat. And all I'm looking for is when my oil moves fairly quickly throughout the pan, and when it also starts to kind of create almost like a shimmer, like an iridescent kind of glaze to it, then that means that the oil is hot. What you don't want is oil that starts to smoke really quickly. That means your pan is too hot and you're burning the oil. And then you're gonna have this sort of like tart, burnt oil flavor in your dish, which you don't want. So I'm bringing my hand over and just kind of using my senses here to see how hot it feels. And as it's kind of coming to a slightly higher temperature, I'm just gonna go ahead and drop my chiles in. And I'm also gonna drop in, I hear a little sizzle happening. I'm also gonna drop in here my onions and my garlic. And you could chop up the onion. I probably should have chopped up the onion a little bit more, but I'm cool with leaving it this way. Go ahead, there was a question coming in.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit why you would use grapeseed versus an avocado oil for cooking?
Absolutely. I mean, grapeseed, avocado oil, like they all have a pretty high smoke point, meaning like, you know, you can cook at pretty high temperatures before you start to smoke and essentially start to burn your oil. So it's just a preference for cooking with that type of oil for these types of dishes. But if you're using olive oil, you could use like a regular olive oil for cooking if that's what you have on hand. But if you're using extra virgin, it's just a more expensive ingredient that doesn't have a high smoke point. And so you're essentially using something that's not really meant for high heat in a high heat scenario. And so all the little particles in the olive oil tend to burn a little bit. So you just, you know, it's preferred to just use something that's meant to cook. So you could use a vegetable oil if that's what you had on hand, canola oil. I personally prefer grapeseed. I like rice bran oil. I have used avocado oil, although I will say that something about the smell of avocado oil, I just don't like. So it's just not my personal preference, but I know a lot of people really love it. So it's up to you. So like I said, the chiles are gonna go fairly quickly. Right now I'm just on a medium heat, and all I'm doing is I'm just making sure that I'm gonna create a little bit of blackening on them, a little bit of color on them, but I'm not burning them to a crisp, right? So you're just creating enough of a color where you're allowing the oils of the chiles to awaken. You're also using your sense of smell here. You should be able to smell the aromatic, the aromatics of the chile coming out of them. when you start to see smoke and you start to cough, then you might have gone a little bit too far. That means that you're then at that point burning the chiles. So, and I'll pull this up to the camera in a moment. So like you can see here, perhaps that there's a little bit of blackening happening there. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a little bit of that color. And for me, that equals flavor. You know, anytime that you, like we could just drop these right into, without pan frying them directly from a dry chile to the hot liquid, and they will rehydrate and it'll be fine. But I like to infuse any additional points of flavor that I can at any point. And also because we're doing little shortcuts here and there, you know, the things that we should pan fry, I think we should use this opportunity to just do that, to make sure that we're getting some of that, also the smoky flavor into mole, because that is a flavor profile that is in our mole. So I probably should have chopped these a little bit more, but it's totally fine. Not a big deal. These are small pieces of onion, so it's not a big deal. If you had a big onion, I would suggest to cut it into quarters or chop it as much as you'd like, 1/2-inch pieces, just so that the heat can penetrate throughout. But these, like you're seeing here, they're almost the size of my garlic cloves. You know, they're maybe like 3 times the size of my garlic cloves, so they're not big at all. All right, so I'm starting to continue to see here some of that blackening happening. So you can see it in this area here. I'm just gonna leave these for just another moment. So this typically takes about 1 minute, 2 minutes to pan fry your chiles. If you had really hot oil, it would go faster. And if you allowed that to happen, where the oil got too hot too quickly and you pan fried them, it's just going to be a quick, like you're going to toss the chiles a lot faster in the oil, being careful not to splash yourself with any oil, obviously, because it's hot. You don't want to create a dangerous cooking environment. So I am seeing here, like, this chile looks great to me. It has definitely developed some of this charring that I like. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my hot, my pot here that has some of that hot vegetable broth, and I'm just simply going to toss the chiles into that pot. And that'll take a few minutes for them to rehydrate, about 5 minutes or so. If it was room temperature, it would take about at least like 10 minutes. So I'll just go ahead and drop those right into my pot. I'm gonna make sure that they're fully submerged. So I'm just gonna use my tongs to really push them down. And then you can see here again, I had that 3 cups of vegetable broth in there. And so as my onion and my garlic continue to get a little color on them, I'm gonna hop back over to talk a little bit about jackfruit. And I'll keep an eye on these as they cook. So let me bring over my cutting board. And I like to do just a little quick demo of the jackfruit itself, so that you know how to break it down. I have already broken down the majority of my jackfruit ahead of time, just to save time in our class here today. But if you've never worked with jackfruit before, I recommend buying young green jackfruit. First of all, it has to be young green jackfruit. If you buy jackfruit in syrup or a whole piece of fresh jackfruit, you're going to have a jackfruit that's going to have sugars developed, and it's going to be a sweet jackfruit, which is good for eating on its own, but not great for these savory dishes. So you can see here that this jackfruit is still, it has like a green hue to it. So it means that it's been processed and broken down before any sugars have developed, and then they put it into a brine to kind of stop the ripening process from happening. And so when you take it out of the can or the pouch or however you choose to purchase it, you'll notice that they're typically in these triangular shapes, and there's a line here that you'll see that of what I call the core piece, and this core piece is essentially what holds together this top portion. And I can use my fingers here to just break down this top portion, and you'll see that it's really easy to break down. And it also kind of starts to shred similar to a meat, like a chicken or pork that shreds, but the bottom here doesn't. And so I still like to use both the bottom and the top just to make sure that we don't have any food waste. And so I strain it out of the can directly in a strainer over my sink, and then I give it a really good rinse. And then I like to use my hands here to squeeze out any additional brine or water or liquid out of my jackfruit. And you'll see that it's quite a bit of liquid. And then I'll go ahead and transfer that over to my cutting board. I'm going to get rid of this bowl with the liquid, and you can see here it's quite a bit. Make sure my onions and garlic are doing okay and not burning. I'm going to give them a quick little flip. You can see some of that color that has been added to my onions and garlic here. This probably still needs a few minutes on that first side. And so it's all a matter here of like checking your hot spots. Like I'm hotter on the right side of my skillet than I am on the left. So I'm gonna just move things over slightly. And my onions are really starting to soften here. So they're starting to come apart really easily. So this is how it's looking so far. Let me lower that slightly so you can see even more. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna come back to my cutting board over here and come back to my jackfruit. So with the jackfruit, all I simply wanna do is I want to identify here where that core piece is, which is the tip of the triangle. And I wanna use my knife to just simply cut that off, because this triangular shape doesn't shred like the rest of the jackfruit, but I still wanna use it. I'll show you in a moment how I use it. And then the other thing I like to do is I like to check for any seed pods that are in the top portion of the jackfruit that shreds really nicely. You can see like this one just kind of burst out. And so I'm simply removing those so that I can break them down. But again, they're still, the flavor is just like the rest of the jackfruit. So I'm gonna use my knife, cut off the core, check for any seed pods. Once I check it and I have this shreddy jackfruit remaining, I'll put that into a pile that's pretty much jackfruit that's ready to go. And I'll just keep going through individual piece at a time. I have just another couple pieces here. And when you squeeze it, it starts to kind of break down as well too. So that helps you kind of use your hands here to sort out seed pods from shreddy bits of jackfruit. This one actually didn't need too much knife action here to separate those. So this pile still needs a little bit more work. This pile is pretty much ready to go. I'm going to add this pile to my bowl of prepped jackfruit that I'll come back to in a moment. And then this jackfruit here, the seed pods, the cores, all I simply need to do is either, if I have a food processor, which is what I use for the other jackfruit that I have, I could toss it in a food processor and mince it until it's smaller pieces that really start to blend into the rest of the jackfruit, or I can use my knife and just simply run my knife through it. It doesn't have to be a perfect chop or anything. It's just literally running through until I have a texture and a size that will blend in a little bit more with the rest of my jackfruit. So no more big triangles, no more big circles or these little kind of bubbly looking shapes. And I do this for a couple reasons. One is I want the jackfruit texture to be as similar to real meat as possible, so that it can fool people, so that people won't be like, what's this weird triangle shape? Like, what is this item that I'm eating? If it's broken down and looks like meat, folks are more likely to want to try it. Secondly, you know, if you had a big triangular piece of jackfruit and you seasoned it really well, seared it really well, it's gonna be really bland in the center when you bite it. So the outside might taste really good, but the center is still gonna be really bland, because jackfruit is essentially like a blank canvas. It doesn't really have too much flavor. And so, you know, I wanna make sure that I'm adding flavor to every little bit. So this is my jackfruit that's ready to go. And the last thing I'll do here is I'll look to see if there's any large pieces. So sometimes, you know, you cut off the top piece and it's still like a whole solid chunk. All I have to do is use my fingers to just break that apart. So that's all I'm doing. I'm going through and checking, and you can see my food processor is little, so it broke down my jackfruit into really small pieces. You don't need to break it down that small. I don't have a lot of counter space, so I bought like a really tiny food processor, and it just minces everything really tiny. But if your pieces are a little bit bigger, you're more than welcome to do that, as long as you feel like, okay, this is a good shape that goes and blends in well with the rest of my jackfruit. All right, I think I got most pieces here. It's pretty simple to break down this jackfruit. And again, like you can do some of this with the, you know, the top pieces of shredded jackfruit. You can do some of this when it's in the skillet, like you can break it down with the back of a spoon or a spatula, but I like to get as much of it broken down prior to it hitting the pan at all. All right. So I am going to just give my hands a really quick rinse. Okay, I'm gonna come back to my onions and garlic for a moment and just check to see how things are looking. So I definitely have some nice color. You can see that my onions are, you know, getting really soft, and, you know, I just use my tongs when the pieces start to come away from each other, which is what I'm looking for. And again, this is gonna provide some of that smokiness that I want in my mole sauce. So I'm going to just remove these onion and garlic pieces, and I'm just going to simply add them to my blender. And we're going to just keep adding things to the blender here. So I'm just going to remove that. If you had your raw chopped tomato, at this point I would add the tomato and I would saute it until it's nice and soft to help some of the flavors develop. You can hit it with a little bit of salt if you wanted to. And then once you kind of see that everything's kind of married, the flavors have really come out of the tomato, like it starts to break down, then you can go ahead and add that mixture to your blender. So since I'm using tomato sauce, I'm not gonna go through that step. But if you do have the tomatoes, you could use the last few moments of the onions and garlic cooking to cook it all together if you wanted to. So that's still hot. This is where I'm gonna cook my jackfruit. So I just left it on really low temp here so that it's not gonna burn my oil. And I'm gonna come back to my jackfruit and I'm just gonna simply season it. So for the jackfruit, I'm seasoning it really simply. You can definitely add more to this. So anytime I'm prepping jackfruit, like, I mean, this is just like a base for you all, but you can definitely add more things. So right now, all I'm gonna simply add is I have a couple tablespoons of just ground cumin, and this provides a little bit of depth of flavor, a little bit of smokiness, a little bit of what for me helps bring it to feel like an actual meat dish. You know, because I feel like most meat dishes do call for cumin, but that slight flavor profile that a meat provides, I feel like cumin helps to get you there. I have a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper, so I'm just gonna sprinkle that over the top. And the pepper is to taste, so depending on how much pepper you like. I'm definitely gonna add some salt here, and I'm gonna add a couple good pinches of salt. I'm using kosher salt. It's nice and flaky. If you have table salt, you can use that, pink Himalayan. The salt really depends on how salty your salt is. I recommend starting with a reasonable amount of salt. And you can taste the jackfruit when it's still raw as well, because obviously it's a fruit, it's not a meat, so you can taste it. But as it's cooking, give it another taste and you can sense, okay, this needs a little bit more flavor, a little bit more salt. If you're trying to keep your salt profile kind of low, another option is to use a little bit of lemon juice, and the lemon juice kind of helps to give it some of that same flavor profile that a salt would. I have here a ½ cup of grapeseed oil, which is the cooking oil. You can see a little smudge in there. I use the same measuring cup to measure my vegetable broth and my oil, so there's a little bit of veggie broth in there. but I have half a cup. It may seem like a lot. The reason it seems like a lot is because jackfruit is a fruit. It doesn't have any fat content like a chicken or pork or any meat product would. So you need to be able to add some of that fat content. It's going to help crisp it up. It's going to help give it the texture of the meat. And I'm going to add not all of it now. I'll probably add about like 3/4 of my, and that sounds confusing. I have a half a cup. I'm going to add about 75% of it. Let's say it that way. And so I'll add a little bit more as it's cooking. And I'm just going to grab my spatula. And I'm just going to mix this all together. And the reason I like to add my oil little by little most of the time is, I mean, I think I just got into the habit of it because with Todo Verde, when we're cooking at our kitchen, we cook jackfruit on a really big flat plancha. And when you have too much liquid that you add to the jackfruit and you're cooking, what happens is most of that liquid just runs off the plancha and goes into the drain. And it doesn't, you know, it's just a waste. So what we do is we add enough to make a nice little marinade and flavor the jackfruit. But then we add more as it's cooking to help crisp it up so that we don't have any waste, essentially. So all I'm doing is I'm going from the outside edges of my bowl and I'm just simply working everything in together until I see that everything's fully coated, that it looks pretty even, that I don't have any dark spots of cumin kind of just in one particular area, that it's really worked in throughout. And when I'm saying that you can add more to this, I mean, you could add mushroom powder, you can add mushroom umami, you can add oregano, you can add chili flakes, you can add whatever your favorite seasonings are that you use in your kitchen on a regular basis. I actually have been really into this vegan chicken salt lately. It's this brand, it's called Hara Spices. It has the price on it and everything. I got it at my local health food store called Grassroots Market, and this one's lime flavor. And it's like, you know, it has lime, onion, garlic, and a few other things. It has sea salt, onion powder, garlic, turmeric, natural lime flavor. And so, you know, you can add whatever your favorite seasonings are that are going to make this jackfruit shine. Again, this is a blank canvas. So the more that you add to it, the more flavorful it will be. And you could mix this up and let it sit for a little while to marinate, or you can hit it right into the pan. I typically just go right in for it. But if you were trying to prep throughout the week or something like that, you could have this sitting in your fridge and you could pull some to cook as needed. If you cook a big batch like this, it also freezes really well. It lasts in your fridge for at least 7 days. So it's a really versatile ingredient. It's really easy to use and store. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add this to my skillet that I was using for my onion and garlic. And I turn the heat back up to a medium heat. It's still a pretty hot skillet. I have a little bit of sizzling happening. I'm not sure if you can hear that. And I'm just gonna drop all of my jackfruit in there. And this is gonna take about 20-25 minutes. So as this is cooking, we're gonna keep working on our mole. But for the jackfruit, all essentially I wanna do is I wanna just check it from time to time, and I want to just make sure that I'm working it so that the bottom that is directly on the heat source gets flipped to the top, and I'm making sure that everything is getting cooked pretty evenly. I have this on about a medium heat. This is a cast iron skillet. If you have a higher temperature on yours, you might need to come by and check on it a little bit more often because you don't want it to burn. So let me remove this bowl out of the way. All right. And then the other thing you want to look out for here is if you start to see that your jackfruit looks a little dry, you can always hit it with a little bit more oil or a little bit more of, you know, some citrus or something like that. It could be a little bit of orange juice if you wanted, a little bit of lemon juice if you're trying to go a little bit lighter on your oil consumption. So while this is cooking, let's come back and keep talking about the mole. So right now, what I have so far is my onions and garlic that have been cooked through. You can see the coloring through the blender here. And I'm just gonna add all my other ingredients to my blender, and I'm gonna allow the mixture to cook for about 20, 25 minutes or longer if you'd like. That'll definitely add flavor to your mole sauce the longer that you allow it to cook. Let me grab another spatula. So I'm gonna add to my onions and garlic the tomato sauce, because I'm using tomato sauce. If you were using the whole tomato, the fresh tomato, it would already be in your blender with the onions and garlic, right? So I have here my 8 ounces of tomato sauce that I'm gonna drop right in. And I'm just using a spatula to try to scrape out and to splash myself, because I totally meant to do that. All right, let's see here. I might have tomato sauce on my face now, but it's okay. It's all part of the process, you know? Okay, so I have my tomato sauce in there. I also have my, so if you were using sesame seeds, you would need to use a couple tablespoons of sesame seeds that you can toast, or maybe you already bought them toasted. In place of that, I'm using, you can see here, like a smoother side. I put them in the same bowl to not wash like a billion bowls. There's some tomato sauce that's splashed in there too. But I have 1 tablespoon of tahini. Tahini is essentially a paste made out of sesame seeds. So I'm using 1 tablespoon of tahini. If you're using sesame seeds, it's 2 tablespoons, because you have little gaps, little air gaps between the seeds. And tahini is pretty much like a concentrated paste of sesame seeds. So I'm just using 1 tablespoon. And then I have 3 tablespoons here of almond butter. So really important here, you can use almond butter, peanut butter. Really important is to try to use an almond butter or peanut butter, whatever your preference is, that's just simply almonds and salt maybe, or just peanuts and that's it, or salt. Obviously we know that there's a lot of peanut butter, almond butter, and all these other butters that have other ingredients like palm oil, sugar, hydrogenated stuff, high fructose corn syrup. If you're using like a Jiffy brand, you have a bunch of other ingredients in there that are not peanuts, that are not what you want to be using here. If you are going to be using that, because that's just what you happen to have on hand, I recommend going lighter on your sugar, which is one of the ingredients coming up that I'll talk about shortly, because that type of peanut butter has sugar in it. So you want to go lighter on the sugar that you add, because then you're going to have a really sweet mole. So I have 1 tablespoon tahini, 3 tablespoons of, I'm using almond butter today. And you could mix it. You could do like 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 2 tablespoons of almond butter, just so you have like all the different nuts in there and the flavors coming through. You could definitely do that. So I'm just going to add that to my blender using my spatula, and scraping down all of that goodness into my blender. All right. And so typically, like, you know, these nut butters are using roasted or toasted ingredients to make them. So it kind of saves you that step of having to roast each individual ingredient. So I'll go ahead and take that away. And then I also have here 2 tablespoons of raw cacao powder. And you could use cocoa powder if you want. Cocoa powder is toasted cacao. So raw cacao means it's untoasted. Cocoa means it's toasted. I always have raw cacao on hand. I try to buy everything like as close to the root product as possible without too much processing happening. And then I have here 2 tablespoons buried underneath the cacao that you can barely see here, but it's 2 tablespoons of raw turbinado sugar. So it's just like a very raw sugar that hasn't been processed. It's obviously not white. It's very granulated. Totally fine. This is gonna cook down for a little while, so it's definitely it's gonna get blended, and then it's gonna melt. If there's any granules left, it'll melt into the mole. So 2 tablespoons of each of these, raw cacao and the sugar. Dropping that right in. And then the other things I'll add are some seasonings. I have here, which one should I start with first? I have 1 tablespoon of dried Mexican oregano. You could use Italian oregano if that's what you have on hand. I'm using here 1 tablespoon dried Mexican oregano. And then I have here 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. That's also going to give it that nice depth of flavor. This oregano will give it some nice earthiness. And then I have here a little bit of fresh cracked pepper, black pepper, again, to your preferred taste. So I'll go ahead and put that into my blender. And the other thing that I still have yet to process is I just need 1 tortilla that I'm going to add to my stove. And I just have a Colonel Truth yellow corn organic tortilla, and I'm going to add it directly to the flame. And all I want is for this tortilla to get nice and charred and slightly blackened and kind of crunchy and crispy. And that's going to add flavor to our mole, but it's also going to be a little bit of a thickener. And this is what I recommend, like whenever you're making, you know, any sort of Mexican sauces, whether it's moles, enchilada sauce, pipián, and maybe you added too much vegetable sauce or vegetable broth or too much water, and you're like, OMG, it's too thin now. You could cook it to reduce it slightly, or you could char up a tortilla until it's nice and dried out, and then blend it with the sauce, and it'll help to thicken the sauce. So just a little quick tip there. So I'm gonna just remove my pot with the hot veggie broth, and I'm gonna just turn on my back burner here. And I'm just gonna char that tortilla. And let me check on my jackfruit while I'm here. Ooh, I have some nice browning happening. I think you can see that. Let me show you both burners here. So I have some nice browning that's coming about here on my jackfruit. I'm gonna add a little bit more oil to it.
Hey, Jocelyn, if someone doesn't have any tortillas on hand, could they add masa harina as the thickener?
Add what?
Any masa harina.
Yeah, you could add masa harina. You just have to be careful that it doesn't clump. So sometimes with masa harina, what you could do is you could add it to a little bowl and with some hot water and whisk it like with a fork or something like that, and make sure that there's like no clumps. And then once you kind of see that it's fully incorporated into the hot water, but it's like still kind of liquidy, then you can add it. So it's almost like you're making a little roux, but instead of using white flour, you're using masa. So you could do that, but just don't add the masa powder directly to your mole, because you might have like little clumps of masa that you're like biting on, chewing on while you're eating. You can add that like little roux mixture of masa to the blender as well, and that'll also ensure that it fully breaks down and blends into the mole sauce. Okay, so I added a little bit more oil. I'm gonna let that keep going. I'm seeing that my tortilla is like literally on fire right now. So I have, you can see some of that charring that's happening on my tortilla. Let me turn up the flame here a little bit. And so it's starting to get nice and crispy, crunchy. Ooh. I mean, you don't have to burn it like I'm doing. You could also add it to an oven, a hot oven, but I mean, it's so hot right now. I don't know if anybody would want to turn on their oven just to, you know, dry up a tortilla. If you have a small countertop toaster oven, you could also play with that. So I'm gonna just leave that as is, this tortilla. So you can see that it's like nice and hard. It's crispy. It's hot right now. So I'm gonna give it a moment. I'm gonna keep turning my jackfruit here for just another few seconds before I move on to that tortilla again. So I'm just making sure that I'm like cooking my jackfruit as evenly as possible. And you can taste it for salt. I haven't tasted mine for salt just yet. You could definitely use a little bit more salt. So I'll add a little sprinkling of it. And you want to make sure that like every element of your dish, you know, I know that the jackfruit here is serving as something to fill your enmoladas, but you want to make sure that every element of your dish like feels flavorful, you know? The jackfruit by itself feels flavorful. The mole sauce by itself feels flavorful. The tortillas are good quality tortillas. You have some good frijoles, you know, everything tastes good on its own, and together it's going to be so much better. All right, so I'll let that keep going. I'm gonna come back to my tortilla here. I'll turn this back to my jackfruit. Let me come back to my blender. So check out this tortilla. How beautiful is that, right? So it's nice and crispy. So I'm gonna go ahead and just break that up and drop it right in to my blender. And the last thing I'm adding here is my chiles and my vegetable broth. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove my lid for a moment. I'm gonna use my tongs to take out my chiles, and you can see here that my chiles are nice and soft, so that in they're steaming because of that hot liquid. They're really soft. All right, I think I got them all out. And then I'm gonna add some of this vegetable broth. So this was 3 cups. I'm gonna add about 2 cups worth of veggie broth and kind of see what my consistency looks like. The last thing I haven't added actually is salt. So you wanna make sure to salt. Sometimes I salt when it's already in the pot. You could do that, but I'll blend some in just to give it a taste. And I'll go ahead and put my lid on here. And let me blend this up until it's nice and smooth. And if I'm finding that it's not getting smooth enough, like it still has too much texture, that's where the veggie broth comes in to kind of help smooth it out in the blender. And if it feels a little too loose for you, again, like don't feel like all hope is lost, because you're still going to put this back in the pot to cook, and that cooking reduces it down. So if it feels too liquidy, you still have an opportunity to create some thickness again. All right, so that was quite a bit of blending, but I just wanted to make sure that I have a nice smooth sauce or mole. And so you can see my consistency here. I'm not gonna add any more vegetable broth to this right now, because it is, for me, it feels pretty loose, but like a nice loose. And then I can add more as it's cooking. I'm gonna grab a spoon and give it a little taste. Ooh, the smell smells so good. So this is kind of like a little like mole colorado. You can see a little bit of that red hue to it. That's from the guajillo. And it has a nice little bit of sweetness to it. You can feel that nutty flavor throughout. The chiles are a back note. It almost feels a little bit brighter than a mole, but we're gonna still cook it because a lot of these ingredients haven't even cooked at all yet. So it's still gonna allow the flavors to marry together. It needs a little bit more salt for me, but let me add it to the pot and then I'll continue to work in more flavors. I'm gonna use the same pot, so I'm just gonna drain this veggie broth out of the pot here and have it set aside.
Jocelyn, instead of sugar, could you add prunes or raisins or dates?
Absolutely, yeah. If you do that, it's only gonna add more delicious flavor to your mole. So yes, you could add, I mean, raisins is what I typically use in the regular recipe for mole colorado. But you could definitely add some figs, some dates. I haven't used prunes, but prunes could still definitely work. And if you were to pan fry them, when you're pan frying the onion, garlic, I would add them towards the end, close to the time that you add the tomatoes. Because you don't want them to overcook, especially if they're raisins. They're like hard to just grab only the raisins. So you want to add it towards the end so that it has some time to cook there. But yeah, that would be a great substitute. Okay, so I have my jackfruit cooking, I have my mole going. The other thing I need to do is I want to just grab my spatula and I want to scrape out all of them. Sometimes certain folks I've heard, like certain friends, families, will, instead of calling this like a mole, they'll call it a molito, which means like, it's not like a true mole that, you know, where you went and did it with like all these individual ingredients and toasting. It's like kind of like a quick version. So I've heard a few people call it that before, like, oh yeah, this is algo molito when I don't have time, you know? But not everybody calls it that. So it just really depends on like the family or whoever you're talking to. So I'm just making sure that I'm scraping everything out of the pot so that I have every little last bit, every little last drop is in here. And you can use this as the base. So like if you really like, for example, like chile ancho or cascabeles or a certain variety of chile in your mole, you could definitely add it, you know? Again, these guajillos are really mild. So you can either add it in addition to the 5 guajillo chiles, or you can swap them out if you wanted to. And that will also adjust the color of your mole as well. So you'll have you know, if you were to use something like a cascabel or ancho, you'll have a slightly darker hue of mole. And so I'm just gonna add a bit more salt.
Jocelyn, Alma wants to know, is this the same mole recipe for the tacos at Smorgasburg?
It's not, no. So this one is just like a quick mole. So the mole that we do at Smorgasburg, it's like an almond-based mole. And so it's definitely more of like almond sesame seed based, you know, rather than like, you know, it does have peanuts, but like not as much as it is like an almond sesame seed base with a lot of chile ancho. So yeah, it's slightly different. There's several varieties of mole out there. Maybe about, I would dare to say that there's probably like hundreds out there, because it varies from like region to region, but then also varies from family to family. But yeah, it's a slightly different mole. So I'm just gonna taste this again for salt. And of course, turn on the back burner. So right now what I'm tasting is like, I have a can of 8-ounce tomato sauce in there. And that sauce still hasn't cooked. So it tastes raw to me still. I can definitely taste that nice smoky onion and garlic flavor. So this needs a little bit of time to just work in the pot. So I just turned it up to like a medium low heat, and I'm gonna let that work for a little bit as I wrap up here working on my jackfruit and getting all my other elements ready for my enmoladas. I'm gonna add the last little bit of oil to my jackfruit here. You can hear that little sizzling that's happening. Okay, I'm just making sure that I'm moving this around. You can see some of that browning happening, but it only happens on the spots that are touching the heat source at the bottom. So, which is why I need to keep making sure that I'm working and mixing it all together. If you had a 2-burner plancha at home, like where you can spread it out, your jackfruit will cook a little bit faster too. So this is almost there. And the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna blitz up some, I have some beans that I cooked earlier in my, what is it called? It's called an Instapot. An Instapot has been like seriously such a game changer for cooking, especially something like frijoles that take a very long time to cook. It just cooks them so quickly. In like 40 minutes, you have some cooked beans. So let me grab those. Let me grab my towels here. And so it's perfect because it just has like, I have like frijoles de la olla essentially that cooks in 40 minutes, no pre-soaking, literally just 40 minutes directly like dry bean into the Instapot. I cook them with a little bit of bay leaves and avocado leaf. So I have a dried avocado leaf. I have some bay leaves. Added a little bit of cumin. I added, what else did I add in here? Some salt, some pepper, some mushroom powder. I'm just getting all these leaves out of here before I attempt to blend it. And the other thing I added, I usually like to add a chile to it. So in this case, I added a chile de árbol. Sometimes I add a chile chipotle. It really depends on whatever flavor I'm going for. The chile chipotle gives it a nice smoky flavor. And so I have a nice pot here, little mini pot of frijoles de la olla. And the only thing I'm gonna do is I put quite a bit of water in there when I cook them. So I'm just going to grab something to pour some of this liquid out of. Just gonna grab a cup here. I have like a little like coffee thing because I'm fresh out of bowls right now because I'm using them all. And so that way I like to blend them with the liquid from pretty much the broth from the beans. It's the best thing ever. But if it's too much, they just become too liquidy. So I can always take them out and get left with just mostly the frijoles with a little bit of broth in there. And then I can add more as needed. So let me put the lid on there because that is just too scary to leave it so open. And then I have here just a hand blender. One of my new favorite tools in the kitchen here at home. We use this all the time for Todo Verde, but it's like a huge, massive one. And I recently got one for home. It's obviously much smaller. And I'm just going to blend up my frijoles until I get a nice paste. I'm leaving the chile in there. So if you cook your beans with any aromatics like that, you can choose to leave them in, except I would take out the leaves. Oh, I see one more bay leaf in there actually. Let me grab it. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and just blend this until it's nice and smooth. And if you find that, actually, I probably still left too much liquid in here, but if you find that you did that, it's totally okay. You can always, one more bay leaf in here. You can always put this back on the stove and let some of that, put it on like some medium high heat and let some of that liquid evaporate. Just being cautious that it doesn't burn. You turn this up slightly. I can see that my mole, you can see some of the splattering that's starting to happen. So all I'll do is I'm gonna just turn down the heat ever so slightly just to make sure it's still staying hot, but I don't want the bottom to burn. And I'm gonna go in with a spatula right now, and I'm just gonna feel to make sure that nothing is sticking to the bottom. And the 20 to 30 minutes of time that you're cooking this mole, I mean, you could definitely cook it longer if you wanted to, because you already saved so much time on the front end with the preparation. But that's just gonna help develop even more of the flavors in your mole sauce. All I'm doing is just blending until I get to a nice paste here. And I'm pretty good to go there. I'm just gonna remove this. And it has just the right amount of liquid. For me personally, I actually like my beans to have like a slight amount of like smoothness to them, so they don't feel like they're too thick. But again, if this is too runny for you, you can make yours a little bit thicker. You can also cook it down a little bit. So I'm pretty much getting to the point where all my elements are starting to really come together. So again, I'm just feeling to make sure, am I having any sticking that's happening? Let me make sure I'm moving this around. I can definitely smell that onion and garlic. And if you find that, you know, you want a little bit more flavor of the, you know, sesame seeds, or you want more flavor of something, because you're using tahini, you could literally drop tahini right into here. Like, oh, let me add another tablespoon of tahini. It's already a smooth ingredient. So you could mix it in. It'll make your sauce lighter. But, you know, you can definitely adjust this as needed to make it even more of the flavor profile that you're looking for. So I'm gonna let that keep going for a little bit longer. And I'm just gonna give that, I'm not gonna give it the full time that it needs to cook before we assemble our dish. But I'd love to hear any other questions that folks have right now as I'm starting to kind of get ready and close to assembling everything.
In your
everything. Go ahead.
Mole Colorado recipe, we added some plantains. Is that something that you could do in this one?
Totally, yeah. So I opted to not add all the same ingredients that we did to the mole colorado, just to make it a little bit faster. But yes, you can definitely add the plantain. Make sure that you get a nice ripe one. So the blacker the plantain, the more bruised up it looks, the more sugars have developed in it. And you would just remove it from the skin and dice it into, you know, like maybe inch pieces, and then you would pan fry those along with the some of the other ingredients that you pan fried earlier. And so yes, you can definitely keep adding to this if you wanted to. You can add the raisins, you can add the dates, you can add the plantain, and just keep going with it to give it even more flavor. You can add a few different varieties of chile, you know, but this is just to kind of give you like a base point, and you can add more as you'd like. Okay. So the last thing that I'll do is I'm going to just warm up some tortillas to get them ready to get stuck. I'm only gonna do one tortilla just to demo what it looks like, what the finished item looks like. And in the meantime, I'm just gonna grab some pickled onions that I already have in my fridge, and I'll tell you what's in it. Of course, they're way in the back. I didn't bring them forward. Here we go. All right. And I'll wait for the cilantro to come out towards the end. But I have these pickled onions, and it's red onions that I simply just sliced up. Smells so good. Let me grab a fork. I have some onions, some red onions that I sliced up. And all I did was I added some apple cider vinegar. I added some bay leaves. You can see that bay leaf there. Oregano, pepper, black pepper. I added some red chili flakes, some lemon juice. You can add other aromatics in there that you'd like a cinnamon stick or star anise, or some allspice berries, or anything else that you'd like to add more flavor. And you really want to macerate the onions, meaning like make sure that they're all, each piece is separated from each other. You can kind of like massage it with the spatula or wooden spoon, making sure that it's like really breaking down and really getting submerged in the liquid that you're adding, which again, for me was mostly apple cider vinegar, some white vinegar, some lemon juice. And you just, the longer you let them sit in there, the better that they'll taste. So these are gonna be sort of like the crunchy, acidic topping to my mole. And then I also do have on hand some toasted sesame seeds that I'll just sprinkle over the top. I just always have some toasted ones on hand, because then you don't have to toast every single time you want to make something. You'll have a little bit that you can already use on hand. So let me see if my jackfruit is good to go here, so that I could use this burner to start warming up my tortilla. Yeah, I have a personal preference in that I like really crispy jackfruit. So I would even let this keep cooking for longer, but I don't have another burner right now because you guys are already on my 2 other burners. And I don't know if my phone is ready to go yet, but I like to cook this until it's like really, really like to a crispy point. So even at this point, like I would add a little bit more of the oil to it and let it crisp up ever so slightly, even more so. And like I said, like, you know, I have on hand some just dry porcini mushroom powder. Like you could have added this towards the beginning, but you can add a little bit of like mushroom powder. You can add, I also have these, let me show you here. These are sort of like bouillons that you can use. I have here this mushroom bouillon that it's called umami from Dark Horse. I have a Better Than bouillon. It's like a vegetable-based bouillon. These things you can add literally to the mole. You could add to the jackfruit. Like this, I would literally just like open up this jar if it ever opens, and just grab a spoon and just put like the smallest little amount, because a little goes a long way with this stuff, and just put that over my jackfruit and mix it in. So these are all things that you can do to add more flavor to any dish that you're making, whether it's this dish or others. It'll just make an even more delicious dish. So just options for more things that you might need in your fridge on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm just gonna work that in, and then I'm gonna bring another comal over to start warming up my tortilla so that we can start to assemble our final dish.
Jocelyn,
any other questions? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how long do those pickled onions keep in the fridge?
I would have them for at least like a couple weeks. But remember, if like you have like fresh lemon juice in there, after some time that will start to go rancid. So I think, 2 weeks at most feels okay. A little bit longer than that, I mean, it's kind of up to you whether you still want to use it. That vinegar is helping to kind of keep things, to kind of preserve things too. So it's not something that's going to spoil right away. Like you don't have to use it in a matter of a couple days. I've had these in the fridge for at least like, I want to say it's been 2 weeks. You can use them for a variety of different things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my jackfruit from the heat so that I could use this burner. Let me put another towel down there so it doesn't mess up my counter here. And then I have a cast iron here that I'm just going to heat up. I'm going to turn up the heat slightly so that I can get right to it. This is my comal that I use to heat up tortillas, to toast any bread, to do a lot of things pretty much. I don't have a toaster oven. I don't have a microwave. I don't have I keep it really simple. And it looks a little dry. So I just add a little bit of oil just to help keep it moist, which is what you have to do with the cast iron. And you can use a paper towel to help you kind of spread it out. These paper towels that I got recently are terrible though. They fall apart so quickly, so I'm moving really gently.
For those with onion allergies, what other vegetables would be a good substitute to pickle? Carrots or radish, maybe?
Radishes would be great. Carrots as well. Although, carrots, you could get a variety of different colors. They don't have to be orange carrots. But I mean, even if you did orange carrots and instead of slicing them, you could either julienne them so you have like really thin strips, or you could also use like a vegetable, what do you call it, to shave off the skin. And you can shave off the, long strips of carrot and pickle that so that you almost have like these ribbons of carrot versus, chopped pieces of carrot. That would look really nice. So sometimes it's like, not just the flavor, it's also like the texture that you create, because the ribbons will have a little bit of crunch, but it'll be a softer crunch than if you did like slices of carrots, because carrots could be really crispy, and sometimes that's a little bit too much for like the softer texture. Like you need to find a balance, So this feels like it's getting hot already. I put it on pretty high heat, and I'm just gonna cook one tortilla for now. Again, I'm using Colonel Truth yellow corn tortilla. Let me grab another one. And sometimes I like to add a little bit of water to it. Sometimes it's fine. Like if they look a little dry, I could add a little bit of water to it. I had some oil, added some oil, obviously you just saw on the comal, so I think it should be fine. Let me put this away. And all I want to do is heat this until it's nice and soft and pliable. I don't want it to get hard at all, which is that fine line that once you get overcook a tortilla, it starts to get kind of hard, right? Let's flip it over. Let me go back to my mole and again, make sure I don't have any some splattering there. Let me lower it a little bit. Make sure I'm not sticking. Okay. Let's cover that. All right. So now I have a nice pliable soft tortilla. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to layer on in my bowl some frijoles. So I have a bowl here. I'm gonna layer a nice amount of frijoles. I'm only gonna eat one right now, so I'm not gonna put too much. I'm gonna set that aside for a moment. in this tortilla, I'm gonna grab my tongs that I left over here.
Jocelyn, would you follow the same heating process on the comal for a handmade tortilla?
Yeah, absolutely. On the same comal. Although it'll take a little bit longer, right? I overly stuffed this one. I'm gonna add that to my, so I just added that. I added way too much jackfruit. It's all good. I'm hungry, as you can see. And then all I'm simply gonna do, so this is just stuff with jackfruit. I'm like, how is this showing you the inside? There we go. I'm gonna remove the lid here. Let me put it down somewhere where it's not gonna make a huge mess. Oh, mole. All right, and let me grab another little spoon here to spoon some of my delicious mole. I haven't given it another taste. Let me give myself a second to just taste here. Make sure it doesn't need any salt or anything. That is already so much better. The onion and garlic have definitely mellowed out even more so because of the cooking process. I don't feel the raw tomato sauce like I did earlier. So it's definitely mellowed out. You can see that I have quite a thick sauce that's developed too. My mole has thickened. If this is the consistency you like, by all means, you're good to go, or you could loosen it if you want to. It's really up to you. And I'm going to hit it with a little salt. I'm like tasting the flavor, and I'm like, let me just give it another little hit of salt. Give that a mix.
Alma and I want to know if we can come over right now and have some.
I'll have the drive-through ready to go. Absolutely. I know, I wish times were different. I would be so open to everybody just coming over and trying some right now. All right, give it one more taste. Yes, that salt helps to make all the flavors feel like they're more well put together. And I'm just going to simply make sure that I give it a nice amount of mole over my tortilla here, making sure that I'm going all the way to the edge and giving it a nice coating. You can see that there. And then all I'm simply gonna do is I'm going to grab my toasted sesame seeds that I have in a random jar. I think this is capers. This is when you know you're like becoming a señora. I love that I'm like coming into my señorahood because I love putting everything in jars. My mom would be like, yes, mija, use this jar for something random, you know? And I'm just gonna nicely sprinkle that over the top. I'm gonna add my onions if I could ever grab them. Oh my gosh, they keep falling off the fork, but let me just grab them with my hand here. A few pickled onions over the top. And the last thing will be a little bit of cilantro, which I didn't pull out of the fridge because it's warm in here and I didn't want my cilantro to wilt. And I just like to pull some leaves of the cilantro. You can use it to just garnish it here and there. And there you have your enmolada. I don't want to cover the onion too much. I want that to shine through. So there you are. So any questions coming up for folks? Check that out. Quick mole. super easy. When we've done mole classes in the past, we only do mole. There's no jackfruit. It doesn't become the final dish like you saw here. We were able to make all of this in an hour and 15 minutes, you guys, or you all, I should say. So, you know, this is definitely a faster recipe, and you can add more to it as needed. So it's a little bit of a shortcut here.